those who love their life will lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. Reading these words over a number of times, I came up with several questions, but also with some associations that seem like other variations on the same theme, both in Jesus' own words and in our prayer book. Firstly, from Matthew's Gospel, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And then secondly, from the prayer book, from the examination of the candidate in our baptismal liturgy, a part of that service that we are not often reminded of, as we only hear it at an actual baptism. The language may sound a bit archaic, but listen for the meaning. Question: do you renounce Satan and all the spiritual forces of wickedness that rebel against God? Answer: I renounce them. Question: do you renounce the evil powers of this world which corrupt and destroy the creatures of God? Answer: I renounce them. Question: do you renounce all sinful desires that draw you from the love of God? Answer: I renounce them. So the questions, my questions: what does it mean to hate my life in this world? And how do I understand world in this context in John? And who is Jesus identifying as the ruler of this world? And what really does it mean to lay up treasures in heaven? What does it mean in my day-to-day life to renounce the world, the flesh, and the devil? While Matthew's treasures on earth are definitely terrestrial, referencing the physical earth, John's world is the cosmos, which the commentator Charles Campbell describes as not being synonymous with God's creation, but is rather the fallen realm that exists in estrangement from God and is organized in opposition to God's purposes. He says, the world is a superhuman reality, concretely embodied in structures and institutions that aggressively shapes human life and seeks to hold human beings captive to its ways. Let me read that last sentence again. The world is a superhuman reality, concretely embodied in structures and institutions that aggressively shapes human life and seeks to hold human beings captive to its ways. He goes on to say cosmos is probably best translated as the system, capital S. And this system is driven by a spirit or force, the ruler of the world, whose ways are dominion, violence, and death. Jesus' life and death thus are the means by which the system is judged and its driving force or ruler is cast out. A renewed promise of the new covenant we hear of in Jeremiah, which will supersede the covenant with Moses with its commandments and statutes. This covenant will be within the people, written on their hearts, on our hearts. And yet we are surrounded and enmeshed in this system and systems in so many aspects of our lives that influence and in many ways limit our options, that define people and divide us, seek to perpetuate systems we hoped we had overcome, systems that promote and support the well-being of a few over the many, that perpetuate our worst inclinations of racism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, and all the ways we seek to define ourselves over and against others as better than. Think of consumerism. How often do we find ourselves purchasing things we don't really need and will likely give us only passing pleasure, or are designed to be discarded in the mountains of trash that we create? Our whole economic system depends on growth, on producing and consuming ever more, with reference to the consumer index constantly in the news. Industries lobby to limit regulations that could at least diminish the waste and environmental impacts of what we do consume. Devices and appliances have shorter lifespans, built-in obsolescence. I listened the other day to a segment on NPR describing how the plastics industry is working with the Girl Scouts in some areas, that while in part addressing the need to keep plastics out of the environment, at the same time manages to promote the need for plastics, promoting an attitude of how hard it would be to live a plastic-free life, but not offering any real solutions. Another aspect of the system is violence, and the myth that promotes the notion that the only way to bring order out of chaos is through violently defeating the other, and the way to defeat an enemy is to eliminate them. We see this in Israel with the drive to eliminate Hamas, regardless of the cost to innocent lives in Gaza and elsewhere. This promotion of this way to deal with an opponent or enemy is ubiquitous from our cartoons, video games, the use of the death penalty in acts of terrorism and in our responses to terrorism. Jesus refuses the way of violence, as Campbell writes, by enacting his freedom from this myth, refusing to respond to the system's own violent terms. He responds to Pilate's questioning with the words, "My kingdom is not of this world, this system. If it were, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to you." Jesus' rejection of violence is what distinguishes his way from that of the system or world. This is the way of life, not death. What other aspects of the system or this world hold us captive and lead to death, not life? We think of racism in all its forms, the anti-immigration voices that not only seek to limit or regulate the entry of outsiders, but to demonize those at our borders. The rules and regulations that intend and do make the maze of the legal path to asylum so difficult. The same can be said about our own systems that are meant to help our less well-off citizens, and yet are so convoluted and modified by requirement upon requirement that many never are able to receive the assistance that they actually qualify for. One congregation I had a connection to some years ago, as their outreach to the community took on the task of training a cadre of its members to sit in the lobby of the local municipal building to help folk navigate the local social system. Martin Luther King Jr.'s way of nonviolent action mirrors Jesus' own work. The violent responses to the peaceful marchers exposed the reality of the worst of white racism for all to see on the TVs in their living rooms. To a degree, it was successful. While present with us still, racism has lost some of its power, and yet we see it rearing its ugly head anew, just now in the increase in restrictive voting laws. At least 14 states enacted 17 restrictive voting laws this past year that will make it more difficult to vote. Many of those laws are specifically designed to limit the participation of minorities. So how do we go forward day by day? As one of our Easter hymns reminds us, we walk by faith and not by sight. Regardless of how we may feel on any given day, we trust Jesus that the world is overcome and that he truly is drawing all people to himself, that gradually the powers of these structures are being diminished. As Jesus also says in our gospel reading, "Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am will my servant be also." We walk in Jesus' way by faith, but with our eyes wide open. We renounce and denounce, refusing to participate in the extent possible in all the ways of the system of this world that lead to death, not life, that diminish, not build up, that seek to separate rather than to unite, to curse, not bless, to hate, not love.